Welcome to the Lida Citroën podcast, your space to grow your influence and elevate your personal brand. In each episode, you'll hear inspiring stories, expert insights, and practical strategies to help you stand out, lift up others, and leave your mark on your team, your community, or the world. If you're ready to make your voice heard, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Hello, friends. Welcome back. It's the Lida Citroën podcast. I am so glad you are here. Again, if this is your first time joining us, you are in for such a treat, and I am so thrilled that you've decided to tune in today for this conversation. If you've joined us before, welcome back. I'm so happy to see you or see you virtually again. We've had so much fun sharing this content, and the feedback from all of you thus far has been overwhelming and full of love and gratitude and insight, and just could not be happier. And today's program is not going to disappoint. So hopefully you had a chance to tune in for the episode just prior to this one, where a colleague and a friend and I introduced this idea of storytelling in a different way. We're talking business storytelling. We're talking how do you share data and complex information in ways that people can understand. And today is actually part 2 of the conversation, because what my guest and I, who I'll bring up in just a moment, what my guest and I realized is there was still so much we didn't say and so much more we can add to the conversation. And since we know how important storytelling is, and we get such overwhelming response to the idea of storytelling, we thought a part 2 was warranted. And I'm not just making up the idea that this is important. There are numerous research studies that have pointed to the validity, the importance, the sort of cultural glue that stories give us. There are Harvard Business School studies. When I was doing the research, I like, which one do I even start with? But I found a McKinsey study of 18,000 business professionals across 150 countries, where they said public speaking with an emphasis on storytelling is one of the foundational skills CEOs and other leaders need to master in this decade. We can't just share the facts and just the facts, right? People don't remember that. It doesn't stick with us. Think back to when you were a child, when somebody read stories to you, right? They often started with once upon a time, right? Or in a land far, far away, or whatever that story began that made a memory for you. Maybe that story taught you a lesson. Maybe it pointed out good versus evil. Maybe it shared something with you that years and decades later came back and you thought, wow, that reminds me of that story from, and you remember the story. You might remember the person who read it to you or where you were when you read it. You might remember the author of the story, or you just might remember the gist of the message. That's what stories do. Whether they're fables or science fiction or romance or business stories, they are powerful ways to communicate. And once we go through today's conversation, I predict you're going to start noticing stories. You're going to hear them in the audiobooks that you listen to. You're going to hear them in the message that your CEO delivers when they have to share good news or not so good news. You're going to listen for the way your child tells you about their day in the form of a story. This is what's happening all around us, and these are the messages we remember. In the last program, one of the things that we talked about was the idea of how a story is structured. And I want to reiterate that here, and then I'm going to bring my guest up. A good story, any story, has an opening, a middle, and an end. It sounds so basic, so fundamental. I was teaching a client this the other day, and they said, I learned that in grade school. And I said, yeah, me too. But interestingly, we all forgot it. So we tend to jump right into the middle of the story, or once we've given all the information, we forget to end the story. Those 3 pillars How do you start? What's the hook? What's the grab? What's the information at the beginning? To the middle, what is the meat? What's the gist? What are you going to unpack? And then the end, where you put a bow on it. Those three pieces have to be there for a good story. And with that, I want to introduce a master storyteller, my dear friend Param, who is joining me on stage. Hello. Nice
Hey,
to see you.
Lida. Nice to see you again. Great to be with you.
And Param, why don't you introduce yourself again for our guests who maybe didn't catch the first episode, but they will now?
Sounds good. I know you introduced me with generous words of being a master storyteller, but I think there's a lot for me to learn. No, so I'll just tell a story. So that's what it's about. I spent 20 years in sales and technology world. I was in those rooms where the presentations are made, deals are done. And then when I left the corporate in 2012 and I started to do sales coaching, that's what I do for our viewers. I'm a storytelling and a sales coach, and I run a company named Spiria, and I'm based out of New Jersey. I did few sort of coaching workshops, and I went back to some of my participants asking, what do you remember from my programs? And very interestingly, most of them did not remember the methodologies of the process. They said, oh, we remember the story you told about the retailer, or one of the stories of the deals that you did in Canada. And that's what made me realize that that's the missing piece. That is what is important. So that's when was the tipping point that I decided to include storytelling into my workshops, and it never turned back. It's been just progressing. That's what I've done. I've done storytelling workshops for thousands of people globally in over 12 countries, and it's fun. I know you and I spoke in the part one, and I'm very excited to be here with you again.
So I just want our listeners to understand what Param Venkat just did. He told us what he was going to say. He said, the best way to introduce myself is through a story. So he set it up. That was his opening. He told us a story which talked about how he got here. He was a speaker. He's a trainer. He does all these things, but he did this feedback survey and learned that stories were what were sticking, and therefore he built a business around it. And at the end, he put a bow on it, and he said to the effect of, and I never looked back. In other words, he had an opening, a middle, and an end. And again, Param does this for a living. But for most of us, if one of those pieces hadn't been there, if he just jumped into the story without saying the story will introduce who I am and how I got here, if he told the opening and forgot the middle, then we wouldn't know what he does. And if he didn't put a bow on it at the end, it would have just kind of fell flat, right? He tells us this great story, and then what happened? So those three elements were at play in my friend's story. And just for those listening, I didn't tell him I was going to do that. So thank you for playing along.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is about storytelling. So it's going to be a few stories at least. Yeah.
I have a feeling you're going to tell some great stories.
Yeah.
You know, one of the, let's start here. One of the things that we often talk about with stories, and especially when we're preparing stories that we will share, is that there are certain archetypes, right? There are certain formats that different stories follow. And I'll just give a few, and then you and I can talk about them. There's an origin story, right? Or a founding story. I write about origin story in The New Rules of Influence, my book. That's kind of like, how did you get here? What started it? You shared an origin story, right? I was doing this training, and then all of a sudden it occurred to me as these people gave me this feedback that this is what they saw was valuable, and I was good at it. So that sort of started or launched how you became a thought leader in this area.
Exactly.
There are failure stories, right? Overcoming failure, right? You always hear, you know, I was broke and I was living out of my car and now I'm a multimillionaire. People want to know, well, how did you do that, right? How did you figure that out? There are teachable moments. And, you know, those are sometimes the aha stories, right? Where people go, okay, you learned the hard way. I don't want to learn the hard way. And then the last one that I would share is an empathy or a vulnerability story, which I think you have to use those very carefully because too much empathy, vulnerability, people start thinking, are you using this as therapy? But enough, and you bond to the audience. What are your thoughts, Param, on story archetypes? And do you have some others that you might want to introduce?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And yes, there are more that I'll introduce. You talked about the origin story. And yes, I did sort of demo it today by talking about how, and it could be much elaborate. I just used a very small version of it. And the reason it's important to is that even when you're introducing your company, you sometimes have only 30 seconds, 90 seconds, what used to be called an elevator pitch. Don't focus on a lot of facts and data. We are such a big company. We have so many people. It's maybe important, but the story that can stick, that will move them, that will make them want to hear more, is what they are looking at. And most of the times, people actually don't tell the origin story. For example, if Uber or founders have to tell, they will talk about how in 2008 the founders were stuck in Paris in a freezing night. They were attending a conference. They come out and there's no taxis available, and they didn't know what to do. They're trying to hail a taxi. They're not getting it, and they're just joking between us. What if we just push a button in our phone and a taxi just arrives, right? Now, such a small idea became such a big company called Uber. Same is with Airbnb. That's an origin story. Now, each of you who are founders and listeners and entrepreneurs or leaders who are listening to this podcast, you will have an origin story. But so it's important to, sort of leverage it and use it. In fact, Lida, when the companies become big, I've seen that let's say a new salesperson joins this big multi-billion-dollar company. Many a times they don't even know how the company originated. Perhaps there were two founders who were sitting in a coffee shop with a napkin and a pen, and they said, "Let's build this," right? Now, those stories get ignored, thinking they are not relevant. But actually, the audience, your clients, and others place a lot of value to it. So that's definitely one kind of story, I would say. And the second is, you talked about the empathy story, the failure, the setback to come back. Stories are very, very useful because it builds credibility. It's not always about all the great things that you did. Customers and listeners want to know if you had a tough time and you came back. Steve Jobs used to do it very, very well. What he used to do is that he will go to introduce a new product or a platform like iCloud, but then he will just sneak in something. What he will do is, I know you'll say that these are the same guys who messed up the last product that they created. I know that you'll come there, but this time it's different. And the strategy is that to anticipate that there may be objections coming from the audience. Hence, what do? You introduce your failure yourself. You not only demonstrate humility, but then you're not giving the audience a chance to think that, hey, will they even succeed this time? You are anticipating, you're going. So failure stories, being vulnerable is absolutely no issue at all. Be vulnerable as a leader and demonstrate your failure stories. That go a long way. There are many more stories, like value stories, if I could introduce very quickly.
Sure.
This is another thing that is very underestimated and I would say underutilized by most of the leaders and the companies. In fact, I go into these workshops with leaders, and the first things I ask is, so tell me some of your company values. Like it or not, people are looking at the phones trying to find some of the values because over a period of time, they are hanging like a talisman in the front office as if they've been put there to ward off the evils. Integrity, honesty, reliability. Nobody cares about it after a point, but please care about it. Use it as a story. And the way to use it is when somebody asks, so tell me one value, you say integrity, don't stop there. For example, you could tell a story. For example, this happened with me, by the way, Lida. And one of our values is integrity. Is one of our partner a few years back had sent an invoice which was incorrect. They had sent out a lower amount for the invoice. And the first thing we did is go back and tell them, hey, the amount is wrong. You got to increase This is not we agreed upon. Now it may sound very simple, but that's what we live by. There's a story of John Mars, the chairman of the Mars Group, the
Mhm.
company that makes Kit Kat and Wrigley's and whatnot. He goes for a he has this habit of visiting his factory, so he went to a remote factory. And now this is not a beautiful ivory tower with a beautiful conference room. These are those factory settings with those beams running and lights are hanging as if they're going to fall on you anytime.
Right.
And the people, everybody is sitting, and one by one salespeople are coming and presenting their achievements.
Hmm.
As the sales managers are coming and presenting, and everyone is sitting, John Mars is sitting, people's attention is not on the presentation because a light bulb in the ceiling is constantly flickering and people are getting distracted, but nobody's doing anything. John Mars suddenly gets up, steps out of the room, brings a step stool, goes up, removes the bulb, puts the step stool, and goes on, and everything is okay now. This story became viral because one of their values is lead by example.
Oh.
Now imagine how many such stories you listeners in your company will have. Just go and find them. There will be some amazing things that your leaders have done, your colleagues have done, and you can connect it to the values that you have. So that's value story, and I can promise, Lida, there'll be thousands of them. It's just that people don't take the effort to find those stories.
Well, and if you know anything about the work I do, which I know you do, values plus action is how we earn trust and credibility. So you
Yeah.
have to know what your values are to know how to act accordingly
Yes.
and know to connect those in the minds of your target audience. So if you don't know what your values are, then you're really starting way back from where you should. And yeah, and to your point, I love that. Yeah, oftentimes these are plastered all over the walls and in the break room and in the lobby of buildings. Yet
Yeah.
people just walk right by them and don't even realize. So
Yeah.
value stories, that's really cool. One thought I had as you were talking is, do we need to think about the kind of story, like what type of story before we start telling stories, or does it just sort of come to us? In other words, if I'm going to present to senior leaders in my company about a request for a budget increase or additional training, do I need to think, okay, is this going to be a failure story or a value story or an empathy story? Do I think about it ahead of time?
Yes. So good question. It's important to plan a little bit ahead of the time, especially if you're not used to being
Okay.
like a storyteller or constantly using stories, because like it or not, a lot of the people struggle and people think storytelling is easy. You started off by saying, and exactly, as humans, we are wired from the childhood
Mhm.
to listen to stories, to tell stories. But as we get into the adulthood, especially corporate, we become slaves to the PowerPoint and Excel sheet, and now all kind of digital platforms, right? And we lose that power that we had of being able to tell the stories. Hence, it no more naturally comes when you need it. That's why I would recommend that if you're going for a specific purpose, if you're going to go to influence your leadership to get a budget approval, be prepared what questions are going to come, and don't
Mm.
just throw facts and data, because they might say, oh, you said that last year, but you did not accomplish it, so why should I increase your budget? So have a little story, that and have a little example from maybe other companies. So I would definitely prepare. I definitely prepare if you're in sales, in terms of what stories, or maybe a customer success story, or maybe yes, failure to come back story, or the value story, which salespeople sometimes ignore a lot. I think it's good to prepare and be available. Now there is going to be some situations, especially when the client's objects or the audience or the leaders that you're presenting to object. At that time, actually, is a great opportunity to share a story, like I talked about Steve Jobs. So yeah, some preparation and some practice is needed for the first definitely few times, but then as you get into the habit of it, and that's important, note down a story that you hear. Don't just listen to the story and forget about it. Have a habit to store it. I think we talked about it in part one of having a story bank. where you keep on depositing your stories and pull it out like a magician when you need it. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Your reputation is one of the most critical determinants of your career success. In my book, Control the Narrative, I help you create your strategy for building, pivoting, or repairing your reputation. Filled with real-life examples, this book contains strategic advice and tactical steps to consistently and confidently create a positive reputation. Pick up your copy today. I'm reminded of something that happened to me a year ago where I tried something very different at a conference, and my team knew I was going to do this. And I was like, it's a group of women, like 500 women. It felt like a very safe space. So I was like, I'm going to try this. My new book was coming out, and I thought, let's lean into this vulnerability. And I tried something on stage, which was a little bit theatrical. I will say it was a little theatrical. Yeah. But that wasn't really what the story was. What happened is, as soon as I came off the stage and I finished my program and everybody went wild, it was absolutely amazing. I did a video, and I recorded a video in that moment, feeling that excitement and gratitude and the generosity of everyone in the room. And sort of the adrenaline was still there, because not only had I been on stage, but I tried something really different, which, going on stage and trying something different is always a little bit nervous. And I shared this video where I walked people through what I had been thinking ahead of time, what happened, and the response. And there was so much authenticity in the video. It went crazy. So here I am thinking it was the story and what I did on stage, but it was really almost more so how I shared it afterwards, because I learned things about doing that. I learned about leaning into my own vulnerability, and hey, it could have gone the other way. I could have bombed.
Yeah, exactly.
I knew that I had a whole program I could build, and it would have been okay, but it worked. And I was so proud of myself. And I felt like sharing it in that sort of authentic, vulnerable way helped everybody else sort of see it that way. And I think that's where vulnerability works. Yes. But as I mentioned, I think sometimes, and you'll probably agree, I think there are people who share too much vulnerability or too often. And it just kind of keeps going and going and going. Would you agree?
Yeah, totally agree. I think you don't want to do that. And I've talked about it probably previously as well. Don't go on. Storytelling doesn't mean that you just go on. No, you have to stop, and you have to make your point, and then maybe tell another story. I think Netflix has this documentary by Brené Brown. Yeah, she tells 40 stories in 8 minutes or something like that, like a TED talk. It's like 1 minute story is dropping, and it's just amazing. So for that, obviously, you need to practice. So any presentations also, you have to practice. It's storytelling is there's a lot of science to it, but there is art. So it's like learning violin or any other music. You don't become a violinist after going for 2 violin lessons. Yeah. So you have to practice your stories. You need to be assured that it lands well on the context of the audience that is sitting there. Don't tell some story about something that happened in some other part of the world when you're going to meet a bunch of kids who may not be able to relate to it if it's not something comprehensible by them. So those kind of small things you definitely need to know. And yeah, it can bomb the way it bombed. So so that's why be prepared a bit about what stories you're going to tell.
Well, and don't you find also that there are sometimes we'll hear people put so much detail in a story. And I know you're a fan of detail, because I can sometimes go too brief in a story. And I know you and I've talked about this, where you'll stop me and say, no, put some more color to it. Give some more description. But I know there are also times where I've heard people give so much detail. And our mind is trying to think all of that detail must be important to the story. So how does it all come together?
Yeah. So, so you need details. When I say details does not mean, so that's where the practice comes. You have to go on. When I say details, the story is a good story when it is memorable, right? People can relate to it. And one of the best ways to do it is bring some visual. You know, for example, saying, I remember walking into the 34th floor in the Midtown Manhattan office of this bank, and this conference room was beautiful with a big library. Now, it's sort of creating some visuals for them, for the audience, to sort of make them part of your story.
Mhm.
Those kind of minute details of, I walked into Gary's office, and I clearly remember that he was yelling at someone on the phone at that time. It's a small detail, but then what you've done here is that you have made your audience part of your visit into Gary's room, and it has a huge impact because now people are, oh my god, what happened, what was he yelling about? There's a lot of things going on
Yeah.
and we want to know more about it. That's the kind of details you need to know, and that comes with a bit of practice though.
Okay.
But you're right, some people can go on thinking that I need to tell about, oh, what happened is that this morning I woke up and I knew that I had a podcast to record with Lida. So I started to get ready and I first put on my first shirt. I just didn't like it. So I changed. No, you don't have to go into the whole story of telling how many shirts you changed.
Unless it's part of the story, right?
Unless
Unless
it's a
there's
part
a
of the
point to
story.
it,
Yeah,
right? Like, how
exactly.
did you land on the white shirt?
How did you land on the white shirt? If that becomes, it has to have
Right.
a point. If it didn't make sense or didn't have a business point. So that's why we say that business stories have to have a business point, and that's what makes it slightly different from the Hollywoods and the theatrical stories.
Right.
Not very different, but the key is that, yes, have a good start, have a strong hook, and usually use a time and place to create the hook, because humans remember time and place.
Mm.
Back in 2002, I remember walking in LA in downtown. People can relate to 2002. People can relate to, LA, hopefully, or someplace, and then bring some characters of who you were walking with or what did you see, and then some surprise element, as you mentioned.
Mhm.
Stories need to have a surprise. If they are not stories, if they're straight line, they're not a story. It's like
Right.
if I said that I got ready, I had this podcast, and I got ready, I came down to my basement office, and I am. Yeah, it's okay. But if something had happened genuinely today, it did not happen. Let's say I'm
Mhm.
going to just make it up. I was ready. I had coffee in one hand. I had my laptop in the other hand. I opened the door to my basement, and guess what? My elbow hit the railings, and the coffee fell on my shirt. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I only got 10 minutes left. Now, that's surprise element, which I just made up. What I'm saying is that stories do have that arc of, going up and down, but at the end, you make a business point on why you told that story. Has to have some meaning to it,
Right.
and then you sort of close it out. That's the way to sort of think about it.
So you mentioned something I want to talk about. So you mentioned the theatrical part of storytelling, and I know that when I teach body language, I study body language. I'm fascinated by it, and oftentimes when I teach elements of storytelling, the body language is important, but I think people think it is what you just sort of alluded to, that you have to be a thespian and be dramatic and have all this charisma, and that's really not what it is. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about some of the key elements of telling a good story, things like gestures and eye contact and pausing,
Yeah.
how that works. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
No, absolutely. And that's the huge difference because, uh, and there are two schools of thoughts, by the way. There are a lot of storytellers who come from the theater background, and I have full respect for them. And that's extremely critical, right?
Mhm.
But what I've experienced, especially when you go to help business leaders, trying to make them do a lot of theatrical stuff doesn't land well with them. One, because they're just not ready for it, they're not made for it, and they might just do it for the sake of doing it, but they are not. It's not sticking with them, and hence it's important that there are other elements which are more important, especially if you're in a boardroom presenting, or you are in a town hall, or you are in front of the analysts or something like that. You're not going to do theatrical stuff. So what are you going to do? What you're going to do is to ensure that you are going to give some relevant examples that is going to land well with those business audience. you are going to take, you're absolutely right about the pauses. People underestimate the pause. They feel that they need to fill the space between you and the other person when the other person is quiet. Don't do that, because it's like saying, I went into my garage today and I wanted to go quickly to get something from the local grocery store. So I started my car, started to take a reverse, and I hit something. I gave a pause to give you a bit of curiosity. What did I hit? What did I do? um, those kind of pauses are very critical, because people want to anticipate. They want to know what's coming next. Those kind of pauses, those kind of little, I won't even call it theatrical, but your body language, your presence, your stage presence is obviously important. Because if you also keep telling the story like a ranting it off, without pausing, without having that eye contact, and without looking at everyone in the room, like, let's roll your eyes a bit, and
Right.
and then stop at one side of the room and then go to the other side of the room. Those are basic things you learn from the, I think all those are extremely critical. You should have a presence. You should know your room very well. So know which room you're going into, those kind of small things. Know what audience you're going to speak with. Um, how the seating is going to be. So, and then comes a bit of your, yes, eye contact, your presence, your body language, how you move your hands, telling things like number one, number two, number three, breaking and structuring your messages
Right.
for clarity. All those are important, Lida. The only thing I'm saying is, you don't have to go very theatrical about the theater voice. Trying to so those are the things, because it's not going to naturally come to business folks.
Well, in your voice is an instrument. Your voice is human, and as good as AI can get, it's not a human being. And your body language, your presence, your voice, your tonality, that's where you connect as humans. And I have heard people do it really well, where there's good inflection, there's intentional pausing, there's speed that's being modulated. And then I've heard the sing-song voices who lull us to sleep. And I think what's important to mention also is a lot of us are doing storytelling, whether it's, again, sharing data in a business case or building rapport with an audience. We're doing it online. And your voice is such a powerful instrument with
Yeah.
that, because we're limited online in Zoom and Teams meetings with the framing of the camera.
Yeah. No, totally agree. I think the energy levels are important. I mean, don't lose the energy level, modulation and the inflections and the ups and downs. Those are important. Otherwise, it's very monotonous, and it's just like a straight line, and that is
Right.
not a storytelling. That is just boring, right?
Yeah.
So
Don't be boring. Just don't be boring. Let's just
just
say
don't be
that.
boring, and don't get too excited and start dancing. But don't be boring as well. Have some energy. Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago. Just as you said that, I thought about it. And I was in the back of the room. I just kind of wanted to see how the audience was interacting with the people on stage. And so I sometimes like to hover in the back just to kind of, as
Yeah.
you said, understand the room. And I saw the next speaker come up on stage, and they had tennis shoes on, which was my first indication this was going to be different. And they started doing the clapping, and and the music started, and they said, "Everybody get up," and I bolted. I'm like, this is going to be one of those. I don't, because it's not going to help me understand the audience, because that's not how I do it. But I also don't want to do jumping jacks before I'm about to speak. And
Yeah.
yeah, as you were saying that,
Yeah.
that's what came
No,
to
yeah.
mind.
Exactly. It doesn't land well. You have to definitely know your room, know your audience, and be prepared on what you're going to say, and have good energy, but just
And
be.
And I'm not advising everybody sit in the back. That's not the point of
Yeah.
my story. I
Yeah.
was lucky that I was sitting in the back. So that's the human element. Another human element is this idea of empathy.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to share bad news, and sometimes a story isn't the right format, or at least a classic story. If we have to talk to our team about layoffs or help them navigate, market conditions or uncertainty or, world events that shake us, which we've certainly seen plenty of those recently. There's a time when a story builds that human connection, and we can talk about empathy. There's also times when stories should be more scripted, because we don't want to leave out important information. If we're talking about downsizing, for instance, with our team, and we just sort of shoot from the hip and tell a personal story, we might miss the important parts. And, maybe you can talk for a moment about how do we unpack bad news in a story in a way that doesn't trivialize it, but
Yeah.
builds connection.
Yeah, no. So I'm going to just shift a bit. So I know we always talk about storytelling, but there's also this thing about story listening, and I think the listening part is where you can build in the empathy. It's just not about you. It's not about the fact that your company is doing bad, so budgets are being cut, and so people always don't want to hear your problems, right? They also want you to listen to their problems, right? So one of the ways is obviously to trigger them, your audience, to tell a little, share what their thoughts are, and now you're having a story conversation. It's not one way storytelling and pushing your information. Now you're demonstrating a bit more of empathy. Now that's one point. The second is about communicating. Let's say HR head, a company decides to change I'm just thought of it just now. uh, Decides to change the medical policy or healthcare policy, which means that the premiums are going to go up for the employees. It's not that bad a news, but that's a bad news for anyone where the cost is going to go up. There are two ways you could do it. Option one is to push an email or say that due to raising costs and economical conditions and blah 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 blah, we have decided to increase the premium, and you will have a 5 to 8% increase depending on the plan that you take. Now, that kind of a message is going to be responded with a huge pushback, because you're not explained the why. You've just told your problem, and you're given some why about, right, sort of the economy is like this and the rising costs and the budgets. But now option two, what if you get on a conference call with all the employees and go something like this? We know that we have had this healthcare policy for the last 3 years and the premium was like this, but something happened. What happened last year is that three of our dearest colleagues, their family members had a health issue which was absolutely new and not being covered by the current health policy. Not only they had to end up paying more, and it impacted the personal lives, and it impacted us as an organization, and that made us think that I think we need to improve our policies. We need to be more cognizant of the fact that there are other health issues that could come up. So what we are doing now is we are going to change the policy, give more coverage, but that would mean that it will be very helpful for all the families, but an increase of 5 to 8%. You know what I'm saying? Now I am sharing a personal example of something that happened, but I did pack some data. So you have to pack some data and facts, but put it into a story and offer it. The chances that it will stick and they will take is much higher than just pushing a fact and data about budget increase and stuff like that.
Well, because what I'm thinking, if I'm listening to that, is I might feel compassion for my coworkers or somebody in the company. I'm also thinking, gosh, what if that happened to me? Like,
Exactly.
yeah, I want better coverage because everybody might be fine today. But what you're saying is these were unanticipated, unexpected health issues. So I'm putting myself in that position and thinking, okay, so if I have to tighten the belt someplace else, this is protecting the company's doing something good for me. Totally different framing.
Totally different framing. And I know you've written books on influence, and not that I fully agree this is the strategy you need to use, but the research shows that humans buy in when they see that they are going to have, they see a loss, or the potentially something could happen if you don't do this, the fear of losing something.
Right.
So Daniel Kahneman, the famous psychologist, he did a research, and that research is called prospect theory. What prospect theory means is that uh, humans have a tendency to remember the losses more than the profits. So let's say that you made $100 in a lottery ticket. You scratched the card and you made $100. You'll be happy for a few days. But let's say you lost $100, or you lost your watch somewhere. The research shows that the sadness of the loss stays much longer than the happiness of the profit that you made. The point I'm trying to come to is that when you're trying to influence a client, or when you're trying to get a new client, there are two ways you could do it. You could talk about all the great things, the future. You come with me, I'll take you to a beautiful world. Our company is the best. We'll do everything. Client don't give anything about it, right? They don't care about it because it sounds exactly like someone else. Because they're thinking, I already have a partner, everything is going well, why should I change? Now, here's where the change story comes in. But if you frame it in a way that your cost of remaining same where you are is going to be higher than the cost of changing to us, because you're going to be left behind if you don't adopt AI, your competition will go up, will land much better than saying, come with me and I'll build AI for you and do everything. So, influencing with examples and stories and showing them that if you don't do this, you will be left behind, it will land much better, is what I'm trying to say.
And I'm reminded of the value formula, right? That benefits over cost equals value. And that means that if I see a better benefit from the cost, then I'm typically motivated. If the cost is greater than the benefit, I'm in the process of shopping for cars right now. And half the time I'll listen to these salespeople, and all they're doing is selling me all these features that I don't care about, right? More technology to somebody like me is not a good thing. So when they talk about all these buttons and all these touchpad things, I'm like, all I'm thinking is this is an expensive car and I won't use those. But when the benefits outweigh the cost to me as that consumer, then I'm thinking, wow, I probably even pay more. Now, don't tell the dealers I said that, dealerships,
Yeah.
but because the benefits to me are greater, and that's how I assign more value.
Exactly. And for all you know, you might walk into this showroom, and that's where the stories again come in, right? Facts and data lead to a conclusion that, okay, I like these cars, or I like these two vendors, but it is the emotion that leads to a
Mhm.
decision.
Yep.
And for all you know, you might walk into a showroom tomorrow and you find that red or blue car, and you start talking to your husband about it, and you say, oh, that's the car I want, and for it may not have all the features. And apparently research shows that car sales people have a habit of hovering around when the
Ugh,
couples are talking.
I know. We should do a whole episode just on how not to sell cars. Um,
But anyway, I think that's where I think it sort of lands. Yeah.
when was the last time your keynote speaker drove more action than just excitement? Today, it's not just enough to energize the audience. We need to show them how to use the skills we're teaching. If you're looking for a speaker who will drive your business goals, let's talk. Check out Lida360.com for more information. So the final thing I want to talk about, and this is a big topic, and I know we're not going to get through all of it, but let's talk about how AI is impacting storytelling. Because we can go into an AI tool today and say, give me a story about this, and it will spit out a
Yeah.
really good story. And I have to think in the next few years, that's just going to get better. So how do we use AI? What are the threats of AI? Why don't you bring us home with that idea?
No, that's a great point. And it's still work in progress for all of us. So I'm not yet an authority on that at all. I don't think I'll ever be. But AI is definitely changing a lot, right? So it can definitely help you to craft your narrative, a compelling narrative. If you prompt well, again, you need to be smart enough to prompt well to get the right story. So I think crafting AI can bring the compelling narrative to you, and data can bring a lot of facts to you. But what are you going to do finally after that? You still have to share that story with someone, with a human. And for that, your ability to bring all of these together is what I call it as sense making. And I'm starting to do some work on sense making. You have to make sense out of all these data, and even the AI story. You cannot just leave it like that, like a script, and start sharing. That's where the emotions come in. That's where the
Mhm.
so, for example, let's say that somebody's loved one is in the hospital. Let's say our loved one is in hospital. I'm there, and the doctors come and say that, hey, we looked at all these things. Glucose is here, BP is here, and all the other information about all the tests we have done, and this is what we are doing, and these are the next steps we want to take. Now you can feed all that into AI to ask what do you think you should be doing.
Mhm.
But there is a problem. There are so many nuances about this family member, of their past history, what could happen when you do the test. Some things don't sit well with them, or they had this challenge when they did this test. Now AI cannot do that, right? So that's where I think the sense making part of it, humans will still have to make sense
Yeah.
of what comes out of the data, and what comes the story comes out of the AI, and be able to relate it to the audience. Again, knowing the room, knowing the audience, we still need to be able to do that. I'll give you another example of sense making very quickly. Let's say that I live in New Jersey. I'm in New Jersey. Let's say that the township people get together, they have a meeting, and they want to discuss about the fact that let's say 15,000 gallons of water get wasted in my township every month, right? And what do we do about it? Now that's a number. Not everybody comprehends number. No, not everybody understands what does 15,000 gallons of water even mean. It's just a number for us.
Mhm.
But imagine now you convert that data into a story. That's where the data storytelling and the sense making comes. Imagine, this is how I'll say, imagine Yankee Stadium, which can have about 60, 70,000 people sitting, right? And now imagine you fill that stadium with water 10 feet high. And now imagine three such Yankee stadiums filled with water 10 feet high. That's the amount of water we are talking is
Mm.
being wasted. Now you're getting? So
Big picture. Yep.
that's a sense making. So converting that things that people don't always understand to something that they can visualize, and this will help them to make a decision. Oh my god, okay, now I get it. That's a lot of water being wasted. We need to stop this, and that can influence a decision very quickly.
And I do envision a world where AI will be able to support that. I know the car example, it's funny. My husband and I took very different approaches to initially searching for this car. Went on Facebook and I asked a bunch of friends, well, this is what I'm currently driving. What are you driving? What do you like? And what do you not like? He went to AI, entered what we wanted to pay, what kind of mileage, like basic tactical information, and it came back with recommendations.
Yeah.
So he brought those recommendations to me and said, "This is a great idea." I said, "Except the models that it's recommending and why it's recommending those cars is because of the heavy technology, its ability to thrive in certain climates." I said, "I don't want all the technology, and we don't live in those climates." So AI didn't understand. And again, it does have to do with prompting, which
Yes, that's true.
my husband and I had a conversation about that. I'm like,
Yeah.
really? You want me around all those buttons? And he thought, oh my gosh, no. Um, but it doesn't understand the human being who's trying to make the decision. And so I think it will have a bigger place in our world, but it'll never replace our friendship. It'll never replace our history together. It'll never replace conversations like this because there's a human piece that it will never do.
No, no,
Param,
absolutely.
you and I could talk, I mean,
Yeah.
just for hours. And I know when we get on the phone, we do.
Yeah.
Thank you for indulging our listeners with 2 episodes of your content, your insight, your stories, and everything you have to offer. I know that you're active on LinkedIn. You've got a great website. How do you want people to reach out to you?
Well, I think the best is the LinkedIn. You can find me, Param Venkat, Spiria on LinkedIn. So that's one way to do it. You can also look at Spiria Inc., SPIRIAINC.com. Those are, I think, the best ways. I'm sure if you otherwise check out Lida, you'll somewhere find me also because we have done some
You're in the
work together.
background.
Yeah, so these are
No,
the ways. But no, very excited
perfect.
always to be on podcast with you and look forward, hopefully, to one more in future. Yeah.
It's absolutely. Let's let our listeners tell us what they want to learn more about. And be sure to tune in for the next episode of the Lida Citroën podcast, where I'll continue to bring you information that helps you stand up, stand out, and really take ownership of your brand and the influence you can have in the world. In the meantime, until I see you again, I wish you all health, happiness, and all good things.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lida Citroën podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the show and leave a review. It helps more people discover these inspiring conversations. For more tools, insights, and resources, visit Lida360.com or connect with Lida on LinkedIn. Until next time, remember, your influence has the power to make a real difference.